My name is Matt Parsons, ecologist with Resource Environmental Solutions, or RES for short, and I've been with RES for about 3.5 years. In 2005, I received my bachelor's degree in forestry from the University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point, where I also minored in soil science. In 2008, I received my master's degree in ecology from Utah State University. I've worked as a professional ecologist since 2009, working mostly in the private sector, but I've also worked in the public sector for a number of years, including stints at the U.S. Department of Agriculture Agricultural Research Service in both Logan, Utah and Fort Collins, Colorado. And I also worked as a wetland ecologist for the Santa Clara Valley Water District in the South San Francisco Bay Area of California. Today I'm going to discuss the Havenwoods State Forest Rehabilitation Project. RES wildlife and ecological restoration experts, in collaboration with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources and stakeholders such as Friends of Havenwoods and the Milwaukee Estuary Area of Concern Fish and Wildlife Technical Advisory Committee, are in the late stages of developing a comprehensive ecological restoration and management plan for the Havenwoods State Forest. Before starting, I'll define some terms that will be used throughout the presentation in terms of their use in the context of ecological science. Degrade in the context of ecology means a reduction or breakdown in the functionality of an ecosystem. Ecosystems have functions like providing wildlife habitat, improving water quality, or providing food for pollinator species such as bees and butterflies. Oftentimes, soil disturbance and resulting non-native plant species invasions can degrade habitat by altering the system's functionality. Ecological restoration, or simply restoration for shorthand, is the process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. Conservation is the preservation and protection of natural resources for current and future generations. Wetlands are areas where water covers the soil or is present either at or near the surface of the soil all year or for varying periods of time during the year, especially during the growing season. The growing season is the time of year that plants are actively growing. Terrestrial refers to land. Terrestrial animals are those that live predominantly or entirely on land. Connectivity refers to connectivity of habitat types, such as forests or wetlands. Many wildlife species rely on large blocks of a specific type of uninterrupted habitat to successfully breed or inhabit an area. Habitat connectivity can be interrupted or fragmented by roads, developments, or other barriers. Implementation means to carry out a plan. Implementation can consist of actions such as construction, invasive species removal, or native species planting. Quantify means to measure the amount of something. For instance, we may want to quantify the acreage of a specific habitat, or the number of breeding birds in an area. And then lastly, metrics are quantitative measurements of data. We are currently in the planning phase of this project, where we develop coarse-scale conceptual plans for the site. The next phase will be the permitting and design phase, where detailed construction documents are developed that contractors that will implement the project can bid on. This is also the stage where any necessary permits are secured, such as those needed to protect wetlands and sensitive wildlife and plants. The final stage is the implementation phase, where all the planning is actually put into action. This phase includes all of the initial invasive species removal, native species planting, earthwork, and short-term vegetation management. The following is a brief description of our work for this early planning phase that is nearly a year in the making. Havenwoods is a 230-acre nature preserve in North Milwaukee. The site is home to several ecosystem types, including wetlands, forests, prairies, and grasslands. Due to past disturbances, including farming and development, the site has been heavily invaded by non-native plant species, which displace native species and degrade wildlife habitat. As part of the Milwaukee Estuary Area of Concern, the Havenwoods State Forest Rehabilitation Project was chosen as a management action to help reverse environmental impairments within the estuary. The Milwaukee Estuary Remedial Action Plan established goals for this and other projects within the area of concern. Those goals are to improve the quality of terrestrial habitat types to support a better population of wildlife species with conservation needs, improve the quality of aquatic habitat to support a better population of fish species, and improve connectivity between fish and wildlife populations by improving size and connecting gaps or barriers of habitat types. There are several quantitative submetrics that have to do with quantifying number and area of native species installed and invasive species removed, area of habitat improved, number of wildlife species with conservation needs found representing breeding behavior, and length of corridor habitat improved. A key component of measuring success against the Remedial Action Plan is establishing baseline data for vegetation, habitat, and wildlife. RES was hired by the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources to conduct baseline vegetation studies and prepare an ecological restoration and management plan for the property. RES conducted a wetland delineation in spring 2021 to map all wetlands on site. RES conducted vegetation surveys in spring and summer 2021. These surveys were designed to document plant species presence and abundance. RES also determined plant community quality for the various plant communities throughout the preserve. Additional tasks completed by RES included mapping of plant community cover types, invasive species, and rare species. All of this information was then compiled and analyzed to help create an ecological restoration and management plan that is designed to enhance habitat and assist in the recovery of wildlife species that have conservation needs. Post-restoration monitoring will help elucidate trends in abundance of native and invasive species and changes in habitat quality over time. RES mapped 11 cover types on site, with mesic forest occupying the majority of the preserve. Mesic forest is represented in the greenish-gray areas in the western, central, and eastern portions of the site. Here, here, and here. The term mesic refers to plant communities with moderate levels of soil moisture. On the spectrum of soil moisture levels, mesic falls between wet and dry community types. Grassland types present include mesic prairie, shown in tan, in the western and south-central portions of the site. Here, here, and here. Surrogate grassland, shown in light grayish blue in the central portion of the site, here, and shrub-invaded surrogate grassland, shown in olive green in the southeastern portions of the site, here and here. Areas mapped as mesic prairie were higher quality grasslands with a higher proportion of native prairie species than surrogate grasslands, which were dominated by non-native grasses and wildflowers. Shrub-invaded surrogate grasslands were similar to surrogate grasslands, but with a higher proportion of shrubs and trees. Several wetland communities were mapped, including southern hardwood swamp, which are the purple areas in the southern and northwestern portions of the site. Floodplain forest along an ephemeral stream in the eastern portion of the site. Shrub-dominated wetland in the central portion of the site, here, and along Lincoln Creek, here, as well as wet meadow and emergent marsh wetlands interspersed in the same areas as the shrub-dominated wetlands. Floodplain forest and southern hardwood swamp are both forested wetland types. The difference is floodplain forests are situated within waterways that contain flowing water and are dominated by species such as silver maple and green ash. Hardwood swamps, on the other hand, are typically situated in depressional landscapes with poorly drained soils that lack an inlet or outlet. These systems are typically dominated by species such as red maple and American elm. Wet meadow and emergent marsh wetlands are wetlands composed of non-woody or herbaceous species. Emergent marsh wetlands have wetter soils than wet meadow wetlands and support species such as cattail that rely on long hydro periods and can withstand long periods with standing water. Wet meadows are drier than emergent marsh wetlands and support species that cannot withstand long periods with standing water. Reed canary grass is the dominant plant in the wet meadow wetlands at Havenwoods. RES found and mapped 3 plant species listed on the Wisconsin Natural Heritage Inventory. the State Special Concern Prairie Indian Plantain shown on the left, State Threatened Pale Purple Coneflower, and State Threatened Wild Quinine. The latter two plant species are not pictured. All three of these species were previously documented on site and had been planted or seeded in the past. RES also found and mapped several American woodcock, which is a state-listed bird species of special concern, shown on the picture on the right. The information on rare species will help to inform avoidance measures to take during restoration implementation. One of the primary ecological stressors at Havenwoods is invasive species colonization. This map shows the extent of the various invasive species found on site. RES mapped 21 invasive species on site, with common buckthorn and an invasive shrub species being the most prevalent. We also found an invasive species not previously documented at Havenwoods or in Milwaukee County, goutweed, which is a non-native plant species in the carrot family, commonly used as ground cover in landscaping. The different colors and shapes on this map represent different invasive species populations and assemblages, and invasive species population sizes. Point features, or the dots, represent discrete patches or individual invasive species locations. Polygons, or the colored shapes, represent large and dense invasive species populations. During vegetation surveys, RES also identified a total of 363 unique plant species throughout Havenwoods in spring and summer 2021 combined. 265 of those were native species and 98 were non-native. This last map shows our proposed post-restoration habitat types and distributions. We drew on the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee Field Station and Milwaukee County Parks Wildlife Population Assessment Report for a number of our restoration recommendations. One of the biggest challenges for restoring the site is controlling invasive species while protecting native plants and wildlife. RES is proposing to control large populations of woody and non-woody invasive species via a combination of mechanical and chemical methods. This includes mowing large and dense populations of invasive shrubs, brush cutting smaller and scattered populations of invasive shrubs, broadcast chemical treatment of large populations of non-woody invasive species, and spot spraying smaller populations, and introducing a prescribed fire regime for short and long-term vegetation management. We are proposing girdling non-native invasive trees such as Siberian elm and black locust to serve as habitat enhancement features. Girdling is the removal of bark from around the entire circumference of a tree trunk in order to kill the undesirable tree. However, the dead tree remains standing and provides vital habitat for numerous types of wildlife. We're proposing to restore, enhance, and expand a variety of natural communities, including southern mesic forest, oak savanna, mesic prairie, shrub-dominated wetlands, wet prairie, emergent marsh, southern hardwood swamp, and floodplain forest through native seed and plant installation. Lastly, we're proposing to excavate a shallow wetland extension to the large wetland complex located in the south central portion of the preserve, which is this area here. This would be done in order to eliminate large areas of invasive reed canary grass, enhance existing wetlands, and create new wetlands. This would result in a complex mosaic of wet prairie and emergent wetlands in this area. Spoils could then be land spread to the west and graded to form topographic complexity. Well-timed and aggressive invasive species control will also be critical for the first 3 years of rehabilitation activities. Additionally, reintroduction of prescribed fire will be a critical factor in enhancing and maintaining the native systems on site for the long term. For more information on the Havenwoods project, please contact Angela Vicchio or Brennan Dow at the email addresses shown on this slide. We appreciate you taking the time to learn about the plan for Havenwoods and are happy to take any questions at this time.